was history's biggest and bloodiest war. More than 50 million people died in World War II. Hundreds of millions were wounded, made homeless, impoverished, had their lives diminished or ruined. Hundreds of cities were smashed. At least 5 were gutted by firestorms. The cost was incalculable, and we are still asking ourselves why it had to happen. There were no feuding monarchs, no trade wars, no arms races, no lack of communication between competing powers. Yet in 1939, the world went up in flames. One man lit the match. His name was Adolf Hitler. We all know who won the war. We Americans admire the valor of our men in the Allied forces who fought by land, sea, and air to liberate the captive nations and smash the Nazi tyranny. For many of us, the story is a simple one. American arms and American resources won the war. This is the commonly held view. But there is another, quite different view, that Hitler substantially won and then lost the war in Europe before America entered it at the end of 1941. That it was Hitler's military and political mistakes that tipped the balance toward the Allies. That had he not made these mistakes, America might have had to stand alone against a Nazi Britain and Nazi Europe and face a future we can barely imagine. There is intriguing evidence for this view, and it will be presented to you in this program by respected military historians and leading British and German veterans of the conflict. But no story of World War II can be told without first trying to understand how Adolf Hitler was able to seize control of a cultured nation and, some say, drive it insane. Those who grew up in Nazi Germany are still pondering how it happened.
The Führer was God.
He had an unbelievable influence on masses. Unbelievable.
To me, and not only to me, he was a genius.
If by some miracle he had suddenly changed his ways in 1939 and not gone any further, he would have gone down in history as a great man.
My question is always, why all the Germans followed him?
Why did the Germans follow him? Adolf Hitler's early life was a recipe for failure rather than fame. He was an ugly, hostile child, some say abused by his harsh father, a minor official in an obscure Austrian town.
So he grew up deprived of comfort. He was also deprived of love.
Charles von Lüttichau is former senior historian for the U.S. Army Center for Military History. The son of a German diplomat, he served in the German Army in World War II.
He was a lousy student. He had terrible study habits, and he had a sequence of failures in the middle school, which was the only stepladder for him to get out of his old milieu, so to speak. And this habit followed him throughout. Example was, we are told by people who lived with him and shared a room, that he would not get up until noon and was basically lazy. Now, some of the important decisions in World War II could not be made because Hitler was sleeping. At 11 o'clock in the morning on the day of the Allied invasion in Normandy, the Commander-in-Chief West, Rundstedt, demanded that the Armed Forces High Command release the armored divisions that were standing on the Channel coast north of the Seine River. And they couldn't get an answer because Hitler could not be disturbed. He was still asleep.
Young Hitler's life is marked by rejections. He drops out of school and goes to Vienna to become an artist. He scratches out a living by selling paintings like these to tourists. Few of them have human figures. Twice he applies for enrollment to Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts. Twice they turn him down.
Of course, one other great ambition of Hitler's was to become an architect. And the course of world history would have changed if he had been allowed to the Academy to become either a painter or an architect, or both, but not a politician.
It is 1918. World War I is coming to an end. Still another career ambition will be denied Adolf Hitler. He has served as an enlisted man during the war. He has been wounded. He has won the Iron Cross. He likes the army and wants to stay in, but the army says no.
He never achieved any rank worth speaking of, but apparently he still liked it.
Dr. Earl Zimke is an author and professor of history at the University of Georgia. He served as consultant to Time Life Books on its World War II series.
So you could say really that it's possible that the forced reduction of the German army gave the world Hitler.
The seed of the future Adolf Hitler emerges from its shell in Munich. It is 1919. With no other career open to him, he decides to become a politician.
Hitler came across a small party that didn't really even apparently have any members. It only had a board originally. It was called the German Workers' Party. Later on, it became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. Hitler found some things in that party that he particularly liked. Namely, one, it was extremely nationalistic, and two, it was anti-Semitic. He became the speaker for the party, and all of a sudden he found out he could draw crowds. His speeches were all essentially about the same thing. He was always the persecuted person. Germany was always the victim.
Power beckons. It is 1923. Hitler and his Nazi followers try to seize the government. The coup fails. He is convicted of treason and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He serves 9 months. While there, he writes Mein Kampf, My Struggle, an autobiography in which he presents a master plan of astonishing boldness. The Jews will be eliminated. Germany will kill off and enslave the Slavs to provide Lebensraum, living space for Germans in the East. At the time, few read the book.
This was a rather remarkable thing. A fellow there sitting convicted of treason, serving a 5-year sentence, eligible to be thrown out of the country, is saying what he was going to do when he came to power.
Released from prison, Hitler decides the best way to reach his goals is to destroy the system from within it. He barnstorms the country by airplane, a novel thing to do at the time, and tells people that only the Nazi Party can right the wrongs they have suffered. He has become an effective speaker, an intuitive politician. He courts and attracts money from rich men who think he may become a useful tool. In election after election, the Nazis lose, but steadily gain political power. By 1932, they win 1/3 of the total vote and become the largest party in Germany. The aged president, Paul von Hindenburg, appoints chancellor after chancellor, trying to form a majority that can govern the bankrupt and divided country. All fail. In 1933, it is Hitler's turn. Hitler now asks the legislature to pass an enabling act that will give him dictatorial powers for 4 years. Tired and intimidated, they pass it.
When he asked for the Enabling Act, he really didn't have a 2/3 majority. But he didn't need really to have one because he had the rest of his majority standing along the wall in brown shirts. And the parties knew how they had to vote if they wanted to stay in good health. From the summer of 1933 on, there was only one party in Germany, namely the Nazi Party.
After World War I, the tragedy was when Germany was defeated, the overwhelming majority of the Germans never accepted being defeated. They believed in military victories, and they couldn't understand why in the final end they lost World War I. Then this propaganda came, stab in the back. We were betrayed, and who was responsible for this? Then they found the scapegoats, most of all the German Jews or others.
Dr. Hans Adolf Jakobsen of the University of Bonn is a noted historian of World War II who served in the German army.
The second very important aspect in this period supporting Hitler was that the overwhelming majority of the Germans were not Democrats. They didn't understand what does it mean, a democratic political system. They believed in an authoritarian system, obedience, honor, greatness of Germany, and so the parliamentarian system they don't like very much. And they always were looking for what they call a substitute emperor. It is very difficult for those who live in a democracy to understand specific conditions of a totalitarian system, being manipulated, being educated in a specific way. In the 30s, as a young boy in my high school, I did believe in all what our propaganda said. I did believe in the rightness of Hitler's policy, and even all the successes of Hitler convinced myself, I was then a young boy, this is the right way, and he does everything for the Germans, for the greatness and for the honor of the Germans. And if you were marching in the rally, or let's say in the Hitler Youth, you had this absolutely feeling undefeatable. There is nobody else who can be compared with us.
Die große Not unseres Volkes, die uns einst ergriffen hat und die uns zusammenführte im Kampfe, ringen und groß werden ließ. Daher können das alle die nicht verstehen, die nicht die gleiche Not in ihrem Volk gelitten haben.
He was somebody, I must say this. Right? And then he could verführen, the Jews, yeah? Was ist verführen? Seduce. He could really seduce the people, and he had some sort of influence I cannot describe.
He was a phenomenon. When he started speaking, he mesmerized, especially large audiences. He was a mass communicator, and he did it by sort of easing into his speech with a deep, sonorous voice that was almost seductive.
Dieses Jahres wurde die neue Regierung der nationalen Konzentration gebildet.
And on a crescendo, kept on going, intensifying until in the end he was practically screaming. Not only practically, he was.
Dieses deutsche Volk emporführen durch eigene Arbeit, durch eigenen Fleiß, eigene Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigene Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst auch Deutschland nicht geschenkt erhielten, sondern selbst nicht schaffen mussten.
Even today, I must say, if one see the documentary film on the rally in Nuremberg, marching thousands of people, and then one cry, Heil mein Führer, this is something give you the strength, a strong, absolutely unbelievable, fascinating feeling. Well, what kind of German, what the greatness of Germany, what kind of discipline the Germans have.
General Johannes Steinhoff is a leading Luftwaffe ace who later becomes head of NATO's military committee. His face shows the scars of combat.
Please bear in mind, Hitler came to power the very moment radio was invented. And Hitler was using radio in a very clever way. After 1 year, after Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, we had the so-called people's receiver. This was a small radio. Each family was having this in their kitchen. So the Führer could talk on a daily basis to his people. He was using, for the first time, the media in a very clever way, using radio in an extensive way. So the medium radio, thank God he didn't have television, was a tremendous tool in his hands.
With the country behind him, Hitler vows to reclaim the territories lost to Germany in World War I. In 1936, he sends German troops into the Rhineland, an area barred to German forces by the Versailles Treaty. Hitler's generals are afraid that the French, with a much bigger and better equipped army, will fight.
Hitler said, we're going to march into the Rhineland, and we marched into the Rhineland, and France did not move. Even if Germany at that time had so few troops that what they did, that at night they quietly marched back over the same Rhine bridges in order to march in with music and bands the next day in the morning. And they kept repeating that and pretending that they had enormous numbers of troops there. It worked.
They had the strength to stop Hitler before he had started a major European war. If the Allies had done something at that time, it probably would have been the end of Hitler.
Next, Hitler marches into Austria and then into Czechoslovakia. Britain and France protest, but again do nothing. Hitler has pulled off a series of brilliant bluffs against larger and stronger powers who lack the will to confront him. General J.A. Graf von Kielmansegg, later to become commander of NATO's land forces in Central Europe, was a young German officer at the time.
The whole German people, he was a great man. Please don't forget about Hitler. One thing, he had given back to Germany, more or less, all what Germany had lost in the Treaty of Versailles without any war, in peace. He had done away in 2 years 7 million unemployed people.
1939, another coup. Hitler negotiates a treaty of alliance with the Soviet Union. Hitler and Stalin agree to invade and divide Poland. Russia will be allowed to swallow the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Now that Hitler's back is secure, he takes a giant step. On the 1st of September, ignoring warnings from an aroused Britain and France, he attacks Poland with masses of tanks led by screaming Stuka dive bombers. It is a new form of warfare, blitzkrieg. The Polish horse cavalry valiantly and briefly charged the tanks with their lances. The spectacle is too much for Britain and France. They declare war on Germany. Hitler is stunned. His foreign minister, von Ribbentrop, had assured him they would once more stand aside.
He didn't intend to start World War II. He didn't even intend to start a European war. He proposed to have a nice little private war with Poland. And that's where he made his mistake.
It is Hitler's first major miscalculation. General Adolf Galland remembers it well. Galland became head of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm at the age of 30.
The German forces were only 5-6 years from their birth. And the Air Force was not ready for a battle at all. And his belief was that France and Great Britain would never attack Germany, having the Russian as allied. He was confirmed in this opinion by our foreign minister, von Ribbentrop. He has a great, great responsibility for the outbreak of this World War II. And I know early in 44, after the invasion, I told Goering, the war is absolutely lost, completely. He said to me, here is my car, drive over to Ribbentrop and tell him the same. And I did. And Ribbentrop, of course, did find some excuse that he didn't make the decision to attack Poland. Goering was against this attack. Absolutely. He saw the risk.
Ignoring the risk, Hitler orders his generals to plan an attack against France. Anyone who thinks of the Germans as unfailingly efficient should study what happened here. At first, his generals decide on the same strategy they used in World War I. An army group in the north will slice across the Netherlands and Belgium and into France. Other army groups in the center and south will exert pressure. One maverick general, Erich von Manstein, objects. He says it's exactly what the Allies expect. It will bog down in trench warfare. Manstein wants to put the main thrust in the center, mass the tanks there, and drive through the supposedly impenetrable Ardennes forest to outflank the Allies. Manstein is overruled and sent away. But by sheer chance, Hitler invites a group of officers to lunch, and Manstein is among them. He manages to present his plan directly to Hitler. Hitler accepts it. Now it is spring. The attack order has been postponed 29 times. It is time to find out if the radical new battle plan will work. As we will see, it does more than that. It writes a whole new chapter in the history of warfare. It finally happens on May 10th, 1940. German armored divisions smash across the border. Tanks are no longer used to support the infantry. They are instead massed to strike swiftly on their own. As they did in Poland, Stuka dive bombers blast a path for the tanks. The British and French do exactly what Manstein had predicted. They blindly march up into Belgium, expecting the big attack to come that way. Instead, the attack slices rapidly beneath and past them. Young Kielmansegg is with the 1st Panzer Division, led by the legendary Heinz Guderian.
The French Chief of General Staff, General Gamelin, did not believe that it was possible to cross the Ardennes with so many tanks, with so many divisions, because if you have seen the Ardennes, you would say he was right.
Were you surprised at how fast it went?
Surprised about what?
The quickness.
We not, no. This we knew before. If he could go through, then the quickness would be there. The French were surprised.
But Hitler worries about possible flank attacks on the extended German columns. General Halder, head of the General Staff, says the Führer raves and bellows that things are moving too fast. Manstein says later that Hitler is bold in planning, but timid in execution. Meanwhile, the German armor races all the way across France in an incredible 10 days. The two main battle groups close in on the town of Dunkirk from north and south. More than 300,000 Allied soldiers, the entire British Expeditionary Force, are penned up with their backs to the beach. An enormous victory is in sight. If the entire British army is captured, Britain will be defenseless. And then something incredible happens. Hitler orders his tanks to halt. Not only to halt, but to pull back. General Guderian, the panzer leader, says, "We were speechless."
We were angry is not the real expression, much more than angry, and were disappointed. And we saw the success. We saw the possibility to catch the British army. It was a very serious mistake.
A serious mistake that changed the course of the war. Why did Hitler make it? Several reasons. General von Rundstedt, commander of the Central Army Group, is worried about a possible counterattack. But Field Marshal Hermann Goering says that the tanks won't be needed. He'll destroy the British Army with his National Socialist Luftwaffe. The Stuka dive bombers take to the air to do it, and the Luftwaffe's fighters rise to cover them. The fighters of the British Royal Air Force swarm to the scene to protect the soldiers on the beach. A ragtag fleet of big and little boats sets out from the English coast to rescue the stranded soldiers. The German Messerschmitts are unable to protect the slow-diving Stukas from the fast British Spitfires and Hurricanes. The Stukas take terrible losses, and for the first time, the Luftwaffe fails.
So this task to prohibit the escape was a task that could not be fulfilled at all. And Goering did overestimate his possibilities with this Luftwaffe.
As a result, the British Army and many French troops escape, leaving their weapons behind. Some call the evacuation a great victory. British Wing Commander Geoffrey Page, now retired, disagrees.
But it wasn't, in fact. It was a victorious retirement. But we were beaten, and there was no question.
Hermann Goering surveys the littered beach with his deputy, General Erhard Milch. Milch says there is no time to waste. An invasion of Great Britain must begin without delay. His plan is daring but simple. Make a quick airborne attack on Britain. Paratroops and gliders will drop on the southeastern coast of England and seize key airfields where the German fighters can land and refuel. Shuttles of Junker transports will bring in 5 divisions of soldiers. They will fan out into the countryside and head for London to seize the government. Goering and Milch take the plan to Hitler, but Hitler rejects it, some say out of respect for the British.
I would not say respect. One of his main ideas was, in this time, to divide the world between Great Britain and Germany. And so he would, was it shown, he would not do too much harm to the British.
I had the occasion to talk to him without any other company. And I told him we will have the opportunity to attack London when London is covered by fog, and we can fly with everything we have available, even with the Junkers 52, like we did in Warsaw. And he said, stop it, stop it. I don't want to hear this. The whole attack on England is against my opinion, against my willing. I could stop it. The English population is of such high class, and they are so similar to the Germans that I hate to fight England.
Whatever the reason, Hitler drags his heels at fighting England and loses his golden chance. Could Germany really have taken England? The German aces are reluctant to speculate. Sir Christopher Foxley Norris, retired Air Chief Marshal of the RAF, is not.
I'm fairly certain it would have worked. Mark you, one's giving the opinion of a very young and ignorant man at the time, but one became older and wiser, and all the indications are that it would have worked. It would have been a pretty puny and unsupported sort of attack, but nothing like as puny and unsupported as we were. We had nothing at all. I've had friends who were given the job of defending 2 miles of coastline with 1 World War I artillery piece. We had nothing. But if they'd just gone roaring straight ahead, your Errol Flynn tactic, I think it would have worked.
Hitler addresses the Reichstag and makes what he calls a peace offer to the British. He sees no reason why the war should go on, he says. He is grieved at the sacrifices it will claim. But Prime Minister Winston Churchill answers that Britain will fight on until the already conquered European countries are free. Privately, Churchill tells Roosevelt that if Britain goes down, Hitler has a very good chance of conquering the world. Dismayed by Churchill's response, Hitler reluctantly orders a massive cross-channel invasion of England. The operation is called Sea Lion. The General Staff says that it can take place only if the British Air Force, the RAF, is first destroyed by the Luftwaffe. Only then can the invasion barges be protected against the British Navy. Armies and navies will sit and wait while the air forces fight it out. It is called the Battle of Britain.
Now the Germans are dive bombing a convoy out into sea. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's one going down on its target now. One, no, missed the ships. He hasn't hit a single ship. There are about 10 ships in the convoy. And here they come. They come in absolute steep dive. You can see that bomb actually leave the machine. You can hear the little rattles of machine gun bullets. That was a bomb, as you may imagine. There's another bomb dropping. Yes, it dropped. Oh, they missed the convoy. No, they haven't hit the convoy in all this. What? Well, yes, oh, we just hit a Messerschmitt. Oh, that was beautiful. He's coming right down now. I think definitely that's that first contest. He's going flat into the sea, and there he goes. Smash! Oh, boy, I've never seen anything so good as this. The RAF fighters have really got these boys, Dave.
After 2 months of the battle, both sides are near exhaustion.
And I participated in the Battle of Britain as a commander of a squadron, flying to London back and forth a total of 68 times. I was shot down only once during the Battle of Britain. But looking back, the Battle of Britain was the toughest part of the war for me. It was a sportive fight between young people of two nations being of the same making, same education. They looked alike, the British and we, sportive, very fair, but extremely tough. Sometimes we had to fly 3 times per day to London and back. And you always lost 1 or 2 of your units during each mission. Some of the pilots couldn't stand it anymore. Some became sick. They went behind the tail of the aircraft before takeoff and vomited. Were flying, came back, vomited again, and became sick.
They were desperately tired. People went to sleep when you were talking to them. There was one man who actually landed, and his aircraft came to a stop, and he didn't get out, and the ground crew assumed that he'd been shot up, so they ran across to him, and he was asleep. He'd just gone to sleep. And even if they weren't asleep, they were incredibly nervy, very jumpy, and the sound of a telephone particularly, which was what sent you off, was, and remains, in my case, to this day, a frightening noise.
When the telephone rang, which was a direct line from the operational headquarters, we could be from sound sleep, we could be airborne in under 2.5 minutes, running out to our aircraft, starting the engine and getting off. And quite often you'd be half asleep and you found yourself up in the air. And then as you climbed up, you could see these massive dots in the distance.
One day, a mass of bombers shoots him down over the channel. He spends 2 years in the hospital and then volunteers for more combat. Why?
I think to be 20 years of age, to be given a fast airplane and a smart uniform and get paid $20 a week to do it, I mean, what more do you want? If I'd been the son of a rich man, I think I would have paid to be allowed to do it.
By now, the Luftwaffe is nearing its goal of destroying the Royal Air Force, the necessary prelude to the massive cross-channel invasion of England. And then Hitler issues another halt order. The Luftwaffe will abandon its task of destroying the RAF and start hitting cities. The RAF is given a providential chance to recover. Another major mistake. Why did Hitler make it?
During that period, the British ran a few raids on Berlin and a couple of other cities, but mainly Berlin, which so infuriated Hitler that he ordered retaliatory attacks on British cities, London in particular, and with that, he dissipated the concentrated effort of the Luftwaffe and brought on increasingly heavy losses, which in the end resulted in the defeat of the Luftwaffe.
And if they had persisted in a sensible strategy, I think they would almost certainly have won. The odds were stacked very heavily on them from many points of view. And it's not an exaggeration, I think, to say we didn't win the Battle of Britain, they lost it.
The Battle of Britain is over. The Luftwaffe has been driven to exhaustion, and Hitler suffers his first major defeat. He dithers, considers various options, and finally turns his eyes toward Russia, the place he singled out in Mein Kampf for Lebensraum, Germany's living space. Hitler will break Germany's treaty with the Soviet Union and invade that vast country. The campaign is called Barbarossa. It is June 22, 1941. A train from the east chugs across the Bug River, bringing Germany oil and corn from the Soviet Union. 1 hour later, 6,000 guns fire. The invasion of Russia has begun. History says it was a huge mistake. But was it?
From the point of view of Hitler at that time, the time that he made the decision, it was the only thing he could do. He needed territory, by his thinking. He needed Lebensraum. The place that he had always said he was going to get it was in the Soviet Union.
The battle plan developed at Hitler's order calls for 3 army groups. The northern group will seize Leningrad. The center group, which is given the most armor, will drive to Smolensk on the road to Moscow. The southern group will push through the Ukraine to Kiev and the Crimea. The armies smash eastward at a high rate of speed, though there are no reliable maps and few roads, almost none of them paved. In the first day, they destroy 1,000 Soviet airplanes. Within a week, they defeat 5 Soviet armies. In the grain-rich Russian Ukraine, the German troops are greeted by peasants with flowers and food and treated as liberators. Hatred of the Soviets runs deep here. Millions of Ukrainians have been murdered and starved to death by the Soviet government. The Ukrainians want to dissolve the farm collectives, reopen their churches, and have the right to own their own land. Instead, SS death squads arrive and begin killing Jews and communists and anyone else who commits even the smallest infractions of German orders. The peasants' grain is shipped back to Germany, leaving them to starve. The angry peasants form partisan groups. When they are caught, they are hanged. Viewed from a military perspective, the German rape of the Ukraine is a terrible mistake, but not to Hitler. Exterminating the Slavs is what he had always planned to do. Some historians believe this is the place where Hitler lost the war. One is Colonel Trevor Dupuy, author and military analyst.
Had he set up an independent Ukraine, an independent Belarus, and allowed them to be truly independent and to be allied to Germany, he would have had a vast proportion of the Russian population fighting the communist Russian population under Stalin. And I think the war would have been won by the Germans and their Ukrainian and white Russian allies had he had the imagination to do that.
The German Center Army has sped all the way to Smolensk, 2/3 of the way to Moscow. The capital of the Soviet Union lies straight ahead. Victory seems assured. And then, once more, Hitler calls a halt.
When they reached Smolensk, something arose that had been there all the time, what you would call the secret flaw in the German plan, or the concealed flaw. That is, Hitler and the army chief of the army general staff and most of the generals had never agreed on what the most important objective in Russia was. The army had always insisted it was Moscow, and the main attack, therefore, had to be made toward Moscow, not just the city, but the general area around Moscow. Hitler had always insisted that the main objective had to be the Ukraine, which was where the Lebensraum was, which was where the good land was.
Why was Moscow so important to the army?
First of all, it is a capital. In all wars, it is of some importance, at least, to get the capital of the other side. Second, if you look at the map, you see it immediately. All railroads are going to Moscow. All other communications lines in this time, like a spin net. So if you had Moscow, all must break down, all over Russia, west of the Ural.
But Hitler was so intent on getting the territory that he refused to recognize that the object of war is not to take territory, but to defeat the other fellow's military forces.
But Hitler stubbornly orders the powerful Center Army to be split. Part of the armor is sent north to help take Leningrad. The rest is sent southward to trap a huge Russian force. The task takes all summer. And then, with the Russian winter coming, Hitler changes his mind again. He will take Moscow after all. He orders the forces he has sent north and south to return to the center. By now, Hitler's control of strategy and tactics has become so tight, the generals joke grimly that you can't move the sentry from the window to the door without Hitler's permission. The long-delayed drive toward Moscow begins. Guderian's tank columns cover 150 miles in an amazing 4 days. There is little doubt the drive will succeed. Russian women and old men begin digging deep tank traps outside Moscow. Then it begins to rain. And the Germans, who are accustomed to paved roads, experience something new: Russian mud.
If you have not seen it, and if you don't have been in the mud, in the Russian mud, you cannot imagine what it means. But I can give you an example, perhaps. So we were stopped, and all the divisions were in a rather very long line. So our first tank in Kalinin, and the last vehicle of my division, one single division, 300 kilometers back in the mud, because it couldn't go on.
Finally, it turns cold, and the tanks are able to move again. And then it turns unbelievably cold. The Germans, who had planned to win in one season, are still in their summer uniforms.
And the cold was horrible. We were stationed 35 kilometers west of Moscow, in Klin. And one night, temperature dropped down to 55 degrees centigrade below zero, and wind was blowing. There was no way to move. There was no way to get your aircraft started or fire a gun. The Russians were flying, and the Russians were attacking. The one side of the airfield in Klin was the German front, the other side was the Russian front. When you took off, you were under fire. The snow was about 2 feet high. And we always wondered, on takeoff, you were rumbling over obstacles. You won't believe it or not, it were dead bodies of Russians frozen into the ground.
Hitler finally acknowledges the need for warm clothes and collects them from German civilians to airdrop at the front.
You could see at that time German soldiers wearing mink coats, ladies, and a steel helmet and a subgun over their shoulder.
Hitler refuses to believe that things are as bad as his generals say, but they are. Kielmanseg's division advances to within 20 miles of Moscow, and then stops.
On the 5th of December, we had to give to our corps a message which, at least in my divisions, never had been given during all the war. We are no further able to attack. This is the end. And this was the 5th. And the morning of the 6th began the counterattack of the Russians, all over the front, not only against us. With new troops, a main part Siberian troops. And to give you another examples, what the Russians can do, part of these divisions came from Siberia by foot, marching. They left their spots at the beginning of August. They arrived on the 5th of December and attacked on the 6th of December. August, September, October, November, 4 months. 1 day in between, and attack and win.
The Russians have proven to be a far different enemy than Hitler or anyone, including the Allies, expected. Their tank, the T-34, is better than the German tanks. Their white-clad ski troops are a surprise. And most surprising of all is the way they use their manpower. Kielmansegg remembers how the Russians cleared minefields.
They drove cows through the mines. And then the mine here went up, the cow went up, and then the way was clear. Okay, cows. And then what I'm speaking of is they did it with men, with soldiers. And soldiers in line, arm in arm, behind machine guns, and then the shoulders were blown up.
One day after the German retreat begins, Japan attacks the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. Hitler is surprised. He has been trying unsuccessfully to persuade Japan to attack Russia from the rear. 4 days later, on December 11, 1941, Hitler impulsively declares war on America. America's vast resources will now be mobilized to defeat Nazi Germany as well as Japan. Hitler's act also sets the stage for a two-front land war, something that German military doctrine says must never be allowed to happen. Within a year, American bombers in England start bombing Germany. In June 1944, America and Britain invade the continent and drive inland, striking a significant blow to German strength and morale. By fall, after many costly American and Allied victories, American troops enter Germany from the west, and Russian forces drive into East Prussia from the east. As the war turns against Germany, a desperate Hitler calls for miracle weapons to save the Third Reich. The ironic fact is that he has them at his fingertips. This part of the story is an amazing one, and few people, even today, know about it.
Shall keep your eyes open.
Yeah, they're breaking at 11, breaking at 11. Planes, 9 o'clock, coming around. Fighter at 10:30, coming around. 10:30 upper lower. B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock. Come on, you guys, get out of that plane. Bail out. There's one, he come out of the bomb bay. What was that? What the hell was that? It went by like we were standing still. Blue leader to group. Get off the air. Going by at 2 o'clock. What the hell is it?
It was the Messerschmitt 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It flies 150 miles an hour faster than our fastest fighters, 3 times faster than our B-17 bombers. Galan test flies the jet in May 1943.
Flying the 262 jet for the first time was quite a sensation. The sensation is like an angel is pushing in the air. The 262 was about 200 kilometers per hour faster than the fastest Allied fighter. And with this superiority in speed, we could neglect the fighter. And you got the sensation the fighters, the enemy fighters, are standing in the air like balloons. You went through them.
The Luftwaffe has found what it needs most of all, a new fighter so fast and so powerful, it can ignore American fighter escorts and shoot down the American bombers. With the Me-262, German pilots believe they can stop America's daylight bombing. But Hitler, who talks incessantly about the need for miracle weapons, doesn't recognize one when he sees it. Besides, he wants weapons built for attack, not defense. He says no.
And late in 43, it was shown to him in East Prussia. I was present. And this aircraft came on a low-level flight in front of him with high speed. And he said, I asked Messerschmitt, is this aircraft able to carry bombs? Messerschmitt, yes, my Führer, it can carry 250 kilograms, or 500 at least. And Hitler said, this is the Blitz bomber I've asked for since years. I give the order to build this aircraft only as Blitz bomber and to equip the bomber pilots with this aircraft. Of course, myself as general of the fighter arm, I did fight against this decision with all I could. I have asked successful fighter pilots like Steinhoff to fly this airplane and to talk to Hitler all the time and to try to convince him that this was the fighter we needed.
Forbidden to use the superplane that might have stopped America's bombers, Galland and his fellow aces rebel and are fired. Goering calls them mutineers.
I was planning to escape. But escaping was only feasible and possible to the east. And I didn't like these thoughts. And therefore, I came close to the decision to suicide.
The German aces are not Nazis. Under military rules, German soldiers cannot belong to a political party. But they are highly disciplined warriors, and even the thought of mutiny is extraordinary. Johannes Steinhoff has 176 victories and is one of Germany's top aces. Later, he will become head of NATO's military committee. Steinhoff describes the state of mind that made the German pilots so eager to get the superplane that they risked being shot by the SS.
In the Battle of Britain, we were victors. We came after having conquered Europe as young men, fighting with sportsmen-like. When the Allied bomber offensive started, we were already, in a way, old men. We had experienced how Germans' fate went down, how we lost all the territories we had conquered, how our cities were destroyed, deeply depressed. We had seen how Hamburg was burning, how Dresden was burning towards the end of the war. So an attack against a unit of flying fortresses was something like controlled suicide. If a formation of 1,000 bombers, by the way, something which will never happen again in history, the flights of the bombers in big formations. If you attacked a unit like this, you were breathing deep and your heart was beating. As the formation leader, you were the first one to attack. To lead a unit of fighters into an approaching bomber unit was a great art, at the right angle, with the right speed. And you are flying an attack, a real attack against how many machine guns? Sometimes 50, sometimes 80 machine guns. They're firing at you. You're going to shoot down a bomber only if you're approaching at very near distance. In the last, let's say, 200 meters, you were tempted to close your eyes and continue and fire. Frightened to death. Frightened to death.
Finally, Hitler relents. Galland, after all, is a national hero with 104 combat victories. He allows the general to form a single squadron of jet fighters.
But by ordering to give the proof that the 262 was an excellent interceptor, I'm sure he had the thoughts, this is better than let him suicide. And the chance to be killed in the last missions, the last 10 missions, was very high. But we didn't pay much attention for it. In these conditions and in this time,
to be killed was nothing for us.
Most of the pilots, 12, were colonels and majors, highly decorated. A squadron of experts. And we decided we have now the responsibility to try to avoid that all our cities are destroyed. We're going to fight to the very end, having the good feeling we have done something without being a leader within the framework of our responsibility as soldiers. And in April 45, on the 18th, I made a very short flight because my plane caught fire during takeoff and crashed. The plane exploded, and for me, the war was over.
Steinhoff, once called the handsomest man in the Luftwaffe, is horribly burned. Later, he will have 70 operations on his face. 1 week after Steinhoff's crash, Galland is hit from above while shooting down 2 bombers and makes a crash landing on his airfield as it is being bombed. What would have happened if Hitler had allowed the Tu-62 to be used in numbers when it was first available?
If we would have used the Messerschmitt 262 in fighter operation, let's say only 100 of these 1,400 which have been built, I'm certain that we would have destroyed at least 200 in each day. This means the 262 could have made the first wave of attacks and they would have broken the formation. And then our fighters, our prop fighters, could do the rest. The day rates would have been stopped very soon.
The Me-262 is so impressive to aviators that a restored 262 from Steinhoff's commando unit is prominently displayed at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. The 262 is only one example of an incredible waste of advanced German technology. Others are equally revolutionary. The Arado 234, the world's first operational jet bomber, could have knocked out our 8th Air Force bases in England and stopped the daylight bombing on the ground. But only a handful are produced. Hitler squanders his dwindling production resources on the giant V-2 rocket that is being fired at London with little military effect. The V-2 is the model for today's ICBM. The V-1 flying bomb is the forerunner of today's cruise missile. The fruits of German research also include the Messerschmitt 163, a 600-mile-an-hour rocket plane, the Gotha Flying Wing, the ancestor of our stealth bomber, the tiny Volksjäger jet fighter, to be flown by the Hitler Youth after training in gliders, even a wind tunnel test model of the space plane we are now developing that will fly anywhere in the world in 2 hours. There is also a design for the A-10 rocket, a 2-stage intercontinental missile to hit America. But Germany can't get these advanced weapons into production. Hitler's priorities are one reason. Another is the fact that Germany's scientists and production officers are in separate compartments and don't work effectively together. So the popular mythology of German efficiency and British bumbling proves to be wrong. In production, it is the Germans who are bumblers and the British who are efficient. The world can be grateful today that Germany's bumbling prevented German development of the atomic bomb.
At the beginning of the war, the Germans thought a atomic bomb, might be possible, as we did and as the Americans did, and probably the French. But as the war progressed, the possibilities narrowed down quite a lot.
Professor R.V. Jones was head of Britain's scientific intelligence at the time. He points out that Jewish scientists worked for Germany in World War I, but aren't doing it in World War II because Hitler has exiled them.
Had Hitler taken a different attitude, they might well have stayed in Germany and worked again. But he was so biased, you see, he would have no patience with nuclear physics because so many Jews had been involved. He used to refer to it as Jewish physics, and he didn't want anything to do with that.
If one thinks how close Hitler came to winning the war, I think rather one should consider how close the Germans came to the war And had it not been for Hitler, they probably would have won it.
Hitler's mistakes had cost him the arms race and destroyed all hope of victory. By now, 12-year-old boys are in German uniforms. German troops are outnumbered 6-1 as the Russians drive toward Berlin from the east. Germany's cities are in ruins. Strategic bombing has destroyed Germany's oil production plants, and only a few weeks' supply is left. As the Russians close in on Berlin, Hitler finally admits defeat and turns on his own people. They have proven themselves unworthy of victory, he declares. Then, on April 30th, 1945, Hitler puts on a new Nazi uniform, sits down on a sofa in his underground bunker in Berlin, and shoots himself in the head. Who and what was Adolf Hitler? A question that has always perplexed us. Not even the people closest to him could answer it. General Alfred Jodl, Hitler's closest military advisor, said from his cell at Nuremberg that he had never known what Hitler thought or really wanted. Minister of Armaments Albert Speer said it was impossible to touch the core of Hitler's being because there was nothing there. Most of the things historians know for certain about Adolf Hitler seem inconsequential. He was bold and timid, sentimental and loveless. He liked fast cars, flowers, dogs, cream cakes, and pretty but not intelligent women. He was a vegetarian, a hypochondriac, and an insomniac who believed in astrology. We also know that he radiated power and inspired fear. Hermann Goering, his closest associate, said that whenever he had to face Adolf Hitler, his heart fell into his trousers. And while we view Hitler today as a madman, demon, or even a comic figure, we also know that for a few years, millions thought of him as the greatest statesman in the world. Who was Adolf Hitler? A half-century later, we ask the question again.
He was like a meteor. He struck and was there for 1,000 years, which turned out to be 10 or 12, and disappeared, taking with him the German nation, as it was known before.
Oh, God. Oh.
To me, and not only to me, he was a genius, but only of the evil. And that was the point the Germans did not know before years he was in power.
What he said about himself very often was he was a man who came from nowhere. He was also a man who disappeared into nowhere.
One German general called Hitler a solitary creature who followed a solitary path, with only his gigantic plans for company. Whatever he was, Adolf Hitler killed 50 million people and came perilously close to conquering the world. Why did these things happen? Churchill said that no war was ever more preventable. German rearmament could have been prevented without the loss of a single life. The malice of the wicked, he said, was reinforced by the weakness of the virtuous, the failure of the democratic states to act together before the monster was fully grown. In the beginning, when it counted most, leadership failed. It is our obligation to remember so that it will never happen again.